and then we'll answer them at the end. And we can't wait to kind of share this voice into jazz with you. I remember for me, personally, I did not grow up listening to jazz. I mean, I think that, but then I think back how I listened to all types of music with my cousins and my sisters. And actually, everything we listened to somehow was came from jazz or had jazz relations. So maybe I did grow up listening to jazz. So I can't wait to hear from my panelists. But first, we have a really cool special video. Well, that was amazing. So thank you so much. That was, if you didn't catch it, that was Nombole, who is on the call with us. She'll be the first one to introduce herself. After that, we'll have Nana Boache, and then we'll have Marlon Richardson. So if we could just go on with that, we will start with our wonderful lady of the hour.
Hey everyone. My name is Nobuhle Ashanti. I am a piano player and violinist from Cape Town. I'm also a composer and arranger and music director. I dabble in executive production as well, which is really cool and really fun. And then I guess I should just talk about my journey with jazz thus far in music. Yeah?
Yep, go ahead.
Sweet. So I started all my introduction to jazz music specifically, and love for music and passion was from my parents mainly in the beginning. My parents are both students of music and musicians and artists themselves. And so being surrounded by music and growing up within a very musical and artistic household was very normal to me. And my dad's a jazz piano player, so I was introduced to more of the jazzy, the intellectual jazz side of the genre, the deep stuff. And from my mom's side, the more streams that have been birthed through jazz, music from the 70s onward. And so I have a great love and passion for both the conceptual jazz and swing style and the genres like old school music and R&B, but like old school R&B and soul and funk and the groovy stuff, as well as African music, African jazz, South African jazz to be specific. And I've been very fortunate to have had my parents as a guide, and at the same time didn't pressure me at all to pursue a career in musicianship and creativity. And I've also been very fortunate to have grown up within the Cape Town music industry, exposed to so many educational jazz programs, like the Little Giants and Sekunjalo Edu Jazz program, and the Grahamstown International Youth Jazz Festival as well. That's where I met most of my peers that I'm still in touch with and perform with and am connected to today. It was such a good time learning about the jazz genre that I'd grown up with, but now I got to experience it and practice it with people my own age, growing up from the age of, 9 onward. It was very interesting, and jazz was always a fun, cool thing, and in a way we felt very mature, like it was something beyond our years that we were already practicing and trying to figure out. And it was really cool how we'd come together as kids and teens and just express our love for jazz every time we'd find out a new bit of information or learn a new thing on our instruments, and we'd just be vibing off of that. It was really cool, and I was very fortunate to be able to experience that. And yeah, I guess that my connection to jazz not only came from my parents, but friendships that I've made over the years, and just having conversations about it and jam sessions and the memories that I've experienced through the connections I've made with people through the love for music and jazz music. And then as a composer, I guess jazz has really allowed me to find out about myself as a being and an artist. And it's a friend of mine, Sean Sandy, he's a bassist. He said something that kind of stuck with me, and he said, and I quote, how jazz acts as a mirror, and an artist always has to first look at themselves and what they're going through and analyze their truths and experiences in order to produce or compose an honest piece of music and art. And yeah, that's how my connection, I feel, has developed over the past couple of years. And to perform that music and to perform it in such a way that listeners connect to it is such a validating experience for my calling to me, with regards to how I see my career and what I do as a calling. And so it's really cool to be able to express myself honestly and openly through such a historical genre of music. I think it's really dope and it's really fun. And yeah, I look forward to the years to come.
Thank you. Now, Nana, watch it. Could you please tell us a bit about your story and how you've kind of combined words and poetry with music?
Okay, everybody. My name is, as a poet, I'm a poet, literary coach, cultural teacher, among other things. I dabble in music as well. Now, my experience with music, let me come, is that there's jazz in everything. Writing it, when it comes to literary analysis, sometimes not getting it is part of getting it, because what if that poem was written to confuse you? The moment you realize, look, I'm confused by this, let's jazz the life up a bit, and there's beautiful music. Now, I grew up on the influences of people like Guy Warren, who most of us call Kofi Ganaba. I grew up listening to the likes of Jack Konimo. I grew up listening to the likes of Jiduble Ambole. And in this current time, I want to relax. I would like to listen to somebody like Kwame Yeboah and the Ohiabe area band, or Kwame Yeboah and the Kwashibu area band. Kwame Yeboah is one of the finest musical things in the world, you know. And when I write poetry, I play a lot with rhythm. In my head, there's always a full phantom from ensemble playing. Worst case, there's a bell, known as Aderokofi. Jazz, no matter how confused it is, has some timing to it. And so my work, no matter how contorted, how twisted, how confusing it might be to somebody, it has some timing in it. Constantly, there is music in my head. I do this deliberately. I've never told anybody this. When I walk, I make sure there's rhythm. Whatever I do, I'm counting in time. I'm playing in time. When I'm on stage to deliver, I'm doing this in time. Even when I am writing, there's some sort of time coming to it. Experience of writing poetry and composing music for the poems. So some of my poems have their own songs attached. I play a bit of the piano. I'm a percussionist. I love quality music for what it is. Was that a 5 for the beginning? Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to Marlon. Or will we watch Marlon's video first?
He's going to talk.
So Marlon, if you could just tell us a little bit about, how you have combined kind of hip hop, you're an MC, you're a maker, you're a DJ, as Unlearn, as Marlon, as running Centers for Education Hip Hop, like how have you combined jazz in your life? And then I know you have some clips that we can't wait to watch, so we'll watch that after your intro.
Yeah, no, certainly. Thank you. Hopefully y'all can hear me. If you can give me a thumbs up, that'd be great. But good morning, good evening to everybody. My name is Marlon Richardson. I go by the artist name Unlearn the World. DJ, overall hip hop creator, but also a hip hop educator with the organization Hip Hop for Change, based out of Oakland, California. And my relationship with jazz is a very close one. My father was a jazz musician. He dabbled in saxophone. Some of my very first memories, if not my very first memories, are of him playing music and playing jazz specifically, playing his instrument. But then I grew up, immersed in the culture of hip hop, born and raised out of New York City. And jazz was always very close in terms of its influence to hip hop and what artists like Tribe Called Quest, Nas, other producers were sampling. And that's something that has informed my creativity as a producer as well, just sampling jazz records. But then further to that, just kind of studying jazz composers, people like Thelonious Monk, people like John Coltrane, and having a great deal of mentors who were also influenced in jazz. One of my mentors very early on in my career was a rapper by the name of Gene Gray, whose father is Abdullah Ibrahim. So some of you may have known him because I think he's a native South African, if I'm not mistaken. So jazz has always been kind of around, kind of the shadow of hip hop that I've embarked on, the hip hop that I've been part of, and I've been pleased and honored to have sampled a lot of jazz musicians in my music, whether it's American jazz, Senegalese jazz, or even Japanese jazz music. So I just love the timing of it, the rhythm, the melody.
We just lost you.
That relationship. Oh, hello?
You're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. And, I think that the relationship between jazz and hip hop is only going to get stronger. You have a lot of contemporaries today, people like Robert Glasper, people like Kamasi Washington, who are very instrumental in keeping the legacy of jazz up to date and making sure that it stays relevant by making sure that it's tying in its relationship to hip hop. So thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you. And we're going to watch the clip before we get to the movies.
Why is jazz important? That's a deep question. If I could say one thing that I've learned from it at least, it's just navigating through situations that may arise. So if you're improvising on stage, there's situations that may arise musically, energetically, compositionally, problems with your instrument, all kinds of things that you have to battle through. And I feel like all that is a good metaphor for life, really. So that's why jazz is important to me, at least.
Okay, well then why don't I pick the people then? Why don't we go to Philip? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No. Go, please.
Is it okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I could just kick it off by saying South African jazz is important to me personally. With jazz, with South African jazz particularly, I just resonate and connect more with that approach and style of celebrating the jazz tradition. And I love how South Africans have kind of made it their own, put their own cultural flair to it. And for me, as a descendant of many of various African cultures, it's a way of me channeling my ancestry and learning historical lessons. There are so many South African jazz legends like Winston Mankungu and Hotep Galeta and just Sibongile Kumalo, like so many artists that just tell so many stories, whether it's through song lyrics or an instrumental tune. You can hear the heaviness of the time of what was happening during their time, and it's extremely educational and so emotional and important for as a born free in South Africa to recognize that and acknowledge it and learn from it and just carry it with me. I think it's a really special link and connection to have to those who have come before us and paved the way for young artists.
Cool. That definitely kind of makes sense. It hits home for like a lot of people. And then you mentioned South African jazz earlier, and so we're going to get back to why jazz is important to everyone else. But can you just differentiate for some of us what is the South African jazz versus what someone else might think of as jazz?
So South Africans learning American jazz when American jazz started kind of being when it started spreading worldwide. South Africa in particular could only learn the style of jazz through recordings, through records, and rather than learning from a jazz player from America, in a personal type of way, they were just doing what they could based off what they were hearing, and of course it wasn't perfect. Most of the artists who started breaking out into jazz, and so it just became the style, and I think it was the ownership of that and making it their own in terms of incorporating more African style elements in rhythmic approach and a more circular type of, with the blues there's a 12 bar form that just keeps going on, and with South African jazz there could be a particular bass line with a lagging swing and a more pentatonic approach to a melody, but improvisation would take place using jazz language, bebop language. So it's an interesting mashup and collaboration of the two styles, and
Very cool. So let's find out if there was something similar in Ghana. So Philip, could you tell us a bit about why jazz is important to you, and was there any type of when jazz came to Ghana, did it become high life, or like is jazz in Ghana just like it's jazz in a club in New York City, decades ago?
That's an interesting question. Whether jazz is jazz, like it is everywhere in the world. You realize that. So we pick on music forms, no matter where they originate from. But definitely when the players play, there's an influence of where they're coming from in their jazz. Now, my influences of jazz, I mentioned to you, come most especially even from traditional music. I love a lot of traditional music, traditional drum ensemble. If you listen to some of the beauty, if you listen to some of the noise, if you listen to some of the timings that we play, both with bells, lead, drums, and support roles, these are fantastic jazz tunes that you would hear. Now, imagine taking a jazz tune apart, something from New York, something from the 60s coming down the line, and infusing a lot of traditional rhythms with it. Unfortunately, I wish I had that resource. I would have provided some of these examples to illustrate what I'm trying to talk about. You would see the Ghanaianness in those jazz pieces. Now, jazz in Ghana is jazz like jazz in New York, and jazz in Ghana has a Ghanaian twist to it. Now, when you listen to contemporary pianists like Victor Day and Kwame Yeboah, I'll keep mentioning them because I know these people well. Bassists like Bright Osei, like Dan Grau, like Philip Aqua. These people have played on whichever stages they are in the world, and they still play Ghanaian jazz. But Ghanaian jazz has a lot of high life inflections in it. So we can easily switch from high life into jazz into high life. It would be a case of the bell which plays in my head for me or timing for me. We can swing from high life straight into a kite. Kite is also one of our traditional forms. In there, you'll still be hearing high life. And so, high life, which is originally Ghanaian, takes seed in almost all of these other art forms we play, including jazz. So we have jazz for the purity of it. When you want to listen to a jazz thing from New York and learn it as it is, replicate it. And as when we want to create our own jazz tunes, Cha Omanyaba, the contemporary form of Cha Omanyaba played by Ohiabeya, you should hear that tune. I wish I could. Maybe I should find the link somewhere and put it in the chat column, and then we can listen to something of this. But pure jazz just dovetails into high life, different versions of high life, from Balogo down into Asoko. It's beautiful. Sorry, you might not be familiar with some of these terms that I'm using, but I'll try and find a link and place it in there. It might bring a lot more light to it. But I am not a jazz pianist like the originals in the people. I like the opinions that are coming up and listening. I'm learning, picking from other creatives. Thank you very much for jazzing up this space.
Yeah, thank you. And I actually have met several Ghanaian people living in South Africa, and I've lived in Ghana before. So we might have people on the call who are like familiar with what you're saying, and also can't wait to listen to those clips that you have. So I had a question from the panel. So let's just go into that question. Then we're going to go, because I think Marlon mentioned to us earlier how he grew up with jazz and his dad was a jazz saxophonist and he had jazz playing in the background. So I think we kind of have a little idea of why jazz is important for him. So I'm going to go to the first question for the next clip to him. First, I am going to go to this question from the audience. And it says, how did COVID-19 impact you professionally and how did you manage the results on your music ecosystem? So what we're going to do is, I want you guys to think about that. That's a deep question. How COVID-19 has impacted you professionally and how did you manage the results on your music and your ecosystem? We're going to come to that question after the next video. So the next video is The Future of Jazz is Bright. And so we're going to learn a little bit from Lauren. I'm going to butcher last name, Talise. Does anybody know Lauren? I'm going to probably follow her now and listen to all her music. But I know Lauren is going to get into what the future of jazz looks like. And she's going to tell you why she thinks it's bright.
The future of jazz is bright. It's only getting better. There are so many brilliant, engaged, creative, imaginative practitioners breathing new life into this genre that we call jazz every day. And I'm ever so inspired every time I hear a young musician just approach this music in a way that I would have never thought to. That's what jazz is all about. And that's what's going to continue the legacy of jazz and the growth of jazz. So as I said, I believe that the future of jazz is bright.
Because some people think, COVID killed the arts, COVID killed the movies, COVID killed music, COVID shut everything down and you couldn't get out. But let's hear from you guys. Like, did COVID affect you? What is the future of music? What is the future of jazz? And how did you bounce back from COVID? What did you incorporate in your music? So let's start with Marlon. If you could just tell us a bit. about COVID and your relationship with music. Okay, well, Marlon's getting his thoughts together. I know he had to get to somewhere too, so he's also driving, so we want him to be safe. Let's go to Shanti, and why don't you tell us, did COVID affect you as an artist? And then how is the future of jazz for you? What is it bright? Did COVID stop jazz somehow? And is it bouncing back, or did it never leave?
To be honest with you, my experience during COVID was an interesting one, one that I'm still unpacking. But I, for some reason, kind of, I distanced myself subconsciously or from my instrument, which is crazy because music really kept me sane. During COVID, I discovered a lot more artists, which is always a really cool thing and a fun thing. But I think I might have been I don't know, intrigued by all the music that I was discovering and analyzing and unpacking. I didn't touch my instrument. And then for the first 4 or 5 months of lockdown. And then, but what it did for me, what it did provide was space to develop my compositions, and especially after hearing all these new artists with so many incredible ideas, and it really inspired me and excited me. And when I felt keen again, which in itself is really strange because the piano is my go-to. It's my everyday type of thing. And so, but when I felt ready, I sat. COVID allowed me to just sit with my instrument and develop my compositions and just kind of tie the loose ends, and that in itself got me excited for when things started opening up again. And I think I definitely wasn't the only one. Since things have been opening up, we have new venues popping up in Cape Town, live music venues, and people are hungry to support live music. They want to hear what's been going on, and performers are really busy. We're taking on so much work. I think we're just really hungry to get back into the swing of things. No pun intended. And yeah, I think I'm very excited for the year. Like 2021 was a good year, and 2022 is looking so great for live music, and it's a really interesting time. People are coming out with albums and compositions to be released this year. I know so many people who are working on those projects, and yeah, I'm just excited.
That's fantastic. Sounds like the future of jazz is bright for you as well. So let's go over to Mark. What do you think about the future of jazz, and did COVID affect your business?
Marlon, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Marlon.
Nana, I'm calling on you. We're going to Ghana. Can you tell us, or should I say Nana, or should I say Philip Boache? Well, you tell me. Please tell us how did COVID affect you and your music, and what's the future of jazz look like for you?
Okay. So COVID affected me. I'll talk about how COVID affected me in my poetry / music and the future of jazz in Ghana. So COVID shut down public performances, shut down public spaces. So there was virtually nothing going on. It was just left to artists who had been smart enough to diversify some funds into other businesses, to survive. And I think COVID created the space for me to work on new projects, to work on new poems, to compose new music. I actually finished my whole anthology during the COVID period. I have the whole anthology set to be published. Some of the pieces have music written to them. COVID also set the stage for virtual concerts. There were a lot of virtual concerts, so artists could still get paid for all these things. People took the time as well, knowing that COVID would eventually leave, set up a lot of event spaces all over Accra and other regional capitals. And now, as COVID has started to recede, it shows the difference between artists who were prepared and those who were not prepared for the renaissance, or what is really coming up straight from here. As COVID starts to recede, there's a lot more demand for the art. There's a lot more demand for music. There's a lot more demand for poetry, for what I do. I'm actually in the backstage of a performance tonight, which was prepared sometime a year ago when COVID was really raging, for instance, to infuse other art forms. The future something in the comment section, in the chat section. It's a link to Asida by Kwame Yabon. It's jazz, gives you a little bit of a highlight feel. You would appreciate the point I was trying to make earlier. What is the future of jazz in Ghana? A lot of younger people are being introduced to the art form or being made to realize that jazz has been a thing which has lived with us for so long and that our ancestors exported it when they were carried off to St. James how many years ago. So as part of Beyond the Return, the musics of Africa, the musics of Ghanaian origin, I think jazz is one of the biggest things on the plate. People are now jumping onto live music because live music is coming back. In a lot of spaces in Accra, live music is on and jazz is a big thing. A lot of people have spaces where, there are jazz nights, strictly for the jazz of it. And so I believe there's a lot more opportunity for young people to get into that space, commercialize it, take up music seriously, because a lot of live bands are coming up. They're getting the chance to play international shows, both here in Ghana and beyond. And of course, in academic spaces, music is still a thing that is being studied. And so I'm not sure the art form is going to die anytime soon. And for the purity of artists like me, who are poets, who have the history of it, I'm not sure jazz is going anywhere. For as long as the legacy of Kofi Ganaba, Ejaku Mo, young ones like me coming up, I'm not sure jazz is going anywhere. Have you realized how, listen to Asida, and you would understand how jazz just gives you the relief to express yourself just as it comes. It's just like that spoken word piece that must be said so hard. Yet you invoke 1,000 sebis. What I mean by sebi is to say, excuse me, when you speak to elders and you want to say something heavy, something vulgar, you say sebi. Once you say sebi, you are permitted to say anything you want to add to it. That was the meaning of that expression. And so it's like taking that sebi to play whatever you want, that liberty to really express yourself. That is what jazz does to me when I'm in the shower and it's blaring out there in the hall, all over in the room, and everybody's wondering what he's doing. So much creative energy. Jazz will live so long at the center of the earth. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So, Marlon, can you share with us your thoughts on COVID and music and your how it affected you or didn't affect you, and the future of jazz?
It's audio. Marlon, we cannot hear you.
Can you? Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, for me, first and foremost, I think during the era of COVID where we were shut down, it cut off a lot of access to culture in the major American cities. Particularly in Oakland, we lost a lot of venues that were very open to jazz music as well as hip hop, especially hip hop. A lot of the venues that would host hip hop shows were pretty much out of business and continue to be out of business. We're now looking to resurrect that culture, that community that we have within the artist community, and you see new venues coming up, and we're trying to make sure that they're responsive to the community and that they're providing space for hip hop to thrive, for jazz music to thrive. But the future of jazz, as I see it, as long as, first of all, I think it's a little bit different in the United States. Jazz for us is an American institution. And I think that there's benefit in that there is a active desire to maintain the culture of jazz as a history, as a historic staple within the American consciousness. I would like to see the same for hip hop eventually. I think that hip hop is very much en route to being that way. Traditional hip hop, I think, will be seen like jazz at some point, considering where we are in the climate. I'm a hip hop educator. I don't believe I could have been a hip hop educator, say, 20, 30 years ago, because hip hop wasn't as established as it is today. But me being a hip hop educator now, I'm being given access to spaces where we can be more equitable in terms of not only providing a space for hip hop artists to thrive, but also an opportunity to make those connections between our present form of expression and what jazz was for its heyday, so to speak. And, I think that the future has a lot to do in terms of artists wanting to find an alternative to mainstream hip hop, mainstream forms of Black expression. So what you're seeing in the United States is a shift in interest in terms of different, more diverse forms of music, jazz being one of them. I mentioned artists earlier like Robert Glasper, Kamasi Washington, who are very much kind of keeping that legacy alive. But then further to them, you also have, the emergence of Afrobeat and how popular that is, not only in the Caribbean, but in the United States particularly as well. So we see all these different forms of Black expression being maintained and being introduced to us as an alternative pathway to something that doesn't necessarily resonate with us, but maybe more commercially successful. But jazz being an institution that it is, in schools and universities, in colleges and other places, I think that jazz will continue to be maintained. People will still be aware of it. I think there'll still be people who are very enthusiastic about participating in jazz and instruments and musicianship, music theory. And the hope is that relationship with hip hop maintains itself so that we're able to continue to move forward. It's so appropriate. I'm in the airport right now and they're playing jazz piano as I'm talking. So thank you.
Right. Jazz is everywhere. Marlon, we got a question for you. Someone asked, how do you manage jazz samples and copyright issues?
Well, a couple of ways. One, first and foremost, and this is not a promotion of any sort, but there are websites. One particularly I want to shout out is TrackLib. And they're a company that was endorsed by Bob Johnson. Bob Johnson is a jazz musician who I think his composition, I'm forgetting the name of it particularly, but that song in and of itself has been sampled thousands upon thousands of times. So in the true entrepreneurial spirit of hip hop and music industry in general, he was able to create a website that allows producers like myself to sample clearance-free jazz music. So they have already paid for the licenses that allow producers like myself to sample without having to ask permission, without having to go through the whole clearance regulations and everything. So that's a great benefit to producers like myself who may not have the massive budgets that the music industry provides for producers or certain artists, where I wouldn't be able to pay the licensing fee for a very popular jazz song to be sampled. Whereas in certain other cases, you still have to pay for samples. And really, I think the issue at hand in terms of justice and equity is the fact that we're paying these licensing fees, not necessarily to the creators, but to the owners of the music, which a lot of the time are the music industry, which a lot of the time are the record labels and the record executives that have placed their names, especially with jazz artists, on the record so that they own the rights to it as opposed to the actual creators of the music. So I think we're finding opportunities where we can pay the creators for what we are borrowing or using, giving them honor, giving them their just due as it relates to just being put back in the public consciousness. So there's ways to navigate around it, and I think that there are more and more opportunities for us to have a jazz sound without necessarily having to sample jazz. I know plenty of artists who are producers who are creating their own sound packs that are jazz influenced. People who know how to play jazz piano and jazz guitar, they're literally recording themselves creating different melodies and then using their hip hop mindset to chop up their own melodies and loop them. So that keeps them from having to sample somebody else. So you can easily be inspired by a John Coltrane riff or Thelonious Monk playing the piano and create your own melody just from their inspiration, and then be able to sample that in and of itself. So there's very creative ways that are going on right now within producer communities to still honor jazz and to get that jazz feel in the music without necessarily having to sample without permission or put yourself in a position of getting sued, which is what everybody fears in the United States.
Wow, thank you. That was a really great question. I think a lot of people just learned how they can elevate their music without necessarily emptying their pockets or worse, getting sued, because, we definitely want to respect copyright. And I appreciate that website link. And I think the links have been put into the chat. So if you didn't catch it or write it down quick enough, you can see it in the chat. So now we're going to go to the next clip, which is, who are your influences? And I think you guys have covered that really well, but next we're going to hear from Jonathan Scales about who were his influences.
I'm a huge fan of Bela Fleck. The way that he takes the banjo from its traditional place and kind of expands the boundaries of it. That's very inspiring to me.
I love Nancy Wilson because she's so narrative and tells a story each and every time she performs, with not only her interpretation of the lyrics, but dynamics and the way that she looks at her audience. That's something that I've definitely gleaned from and that I was able to actually incorporate into my own performance.
John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, Josh Redman, Michael Brecker, Chris Potter, Andy Garrett. I could go on and on and on with saxophone players.
Ella was such a big one. And I think that her joy is something that I've really taken on in my own music making.
Of covering kind of everybody's influences. I don't know if anyone feels like there's someone they haven't mentioned they want to mention now. Otherwise, to save some time, we could go to the next video. Speak now or forever hold your peace. If there's someone you want to mention for the audience to know, yeah, this is definitely someone I didn't get a chance to mention yet who was an important influencer in my life for music.
Okay, we can go ahead.
Okay, let's go ahead to the future of jazz is global.
I think the future of jazz is that it's a global music, and it's going to continue to grow and change and reflect the times. We really saw that when we were on an AMA tour in Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan has developed their own jazz identity, and people played it for us, and it was just so cool to see this thing that in a way is so American, but really be absorbed by this other culture and allow them a way to make jazz, but in a way that really expresses their culture. So I think that that's the future of jazz, that we're gonna continue to see it grow and change and reflect where people are at in their time.
Awesome. I think she took the words out of like at least one or two of our panelists' mouths. We already talked about kind of how jazz kind of goes from different places and picks up the sounds and like the hints and the relevance in that area. But let's just, as we're closing out, I'm also, if you have questions, please send them in. But as we start to prepare to close, why don't we start giving some last thoughts on the future of jazz is global and, just how you see that playing out in your life, in your experience, what you think will happen in the next 10 to 15 years with jazz and music and our globalization of our world. And let's start with Philip Boachi.
Sorry, I missed that. Sound check.
Yeah, okay. So basically, we watched this short clip about how future of jazz is global, which I think you've already kind of mentioned. You believe in that. So just what do you think for, in your closing comments, what is the future of jazz? How is that global? What is going to happen with the future of jazz in Ghana? You've mentioned it, but jazz around the world, how is all this global and how are we all going to stay connected?
Okay. Just like we're having this conversation, I believe that we should create more platforms where young creatives, young musicians, people who feed on jazz lovers can have conversations like this about protection, copyright issues, about propagating jazz, about creating jazz, about even the essence of it, and its various influences from other cultures. Look, it's through such conversations that we'll get to know what somebody is doing, somewhere in South Africa, what somebody is doing somewhere in the Amazon region, what somebody is doing anywhere else. I think more conversations like this would help. And I was going to recommend, can all the people on this platform collaborate and come up with something beautiful, something jazz or poetry, something nice. I'm willing people. If you are somebody type the piano already. So such collaborations would do us a lot of good because it empowers young creatives all over the world. It helps us to tell our stories. And this is the reality we are creating for the generation after us. Look, we're stuck with this digital thing. We're stuck with this new age. We're stuck with being the future leaders. We're adults now. We are supposed to direct the future how it's supposed to go. And when the future is old enough, it knows how to treat us with some respect. So people, the future is now. There's no practice for the future. This is what it is. We're living it now. And so I believe collaborations are the way to go. International conversations across barriers and across other born of jazz. Jazz is born of a bit of poetry and a bit of drum language. Somebody on the piano, somebody on the bars, and most importantly, what we believe in, our self-worth. This element of humanness. What we've had today has been so beautiful for me. I see a lot of unity across the globe, all in the realm of art. In the name of jazz. I like that word. I like using it when I speak a lot. So people, let's keep it real. Please, I'm ready. Anybody up for this? I'm so ready. Let's do this. Let's make it happen. Let's birth something, some music, some poetry out of this little seminar we have. Thank you.
Very cool. So collaborate is kind of the future. We're going to work together. And you heard that you have been challenged to kind of come up with something and work with Philip Boache. I see come up with something. So I just got a question about mentorship. How important is mentorship in the future of jazz? And I feel like, all of you could answer that question. So Marlon, I see you. So maybe you could quote on that, up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think mentorship is important, right? Me as a hip hop educator, that's what we thrive in, is the idea of creating a community-based counter narrative to the tropes and the stereotypes that are typically associated with hip hop culture or other forms of Black expression through community mentorship, through local artists providing that level of guidance and to give game to the younger generation, to ground them and their creativity in the history of this culture, in the history of older forms of expression, so that informs the creative process. So mentorship is extremely important and integral to the thriving of both hip hop as well as jazz. I think that's what we're hoping for, is that the next generation can carry on what has been laid before them. But if they're not aware of it, if they're not given the tools, if they're not given the empowerment of that knowledge, then we're kind of laying it by the wayside. So you see efforts in the States. I'm sure you see efforts in all of Africa, but in other places in terms of jazz, kind of having a resurrection, so to speak, and hip hop being as popular as it is, making those ties and having artists on the ground who can provide that mentorship to the younger generation can definitely serve to allow both hip hop and its father or mother, however you want to see it, of jazz, continuing to move forward for generations.
Thank you. And Nombole, I'm working on it. I'm sorry. Ashanti, I got. Say your name again for us as you close out. Obviously everyone else, but just for me. And then tell us, you talked about mentorship already, how you were in lots of programs that kind of, as a young person, that kind of put you on the right path. So how do you think mentorship for you, when you're mentoring the next generation, as we're closing out, how are you going to mentor the next generation to ensure that jazz continues and jazz is global?
You're doing great. It's no bullshit. You're doing great. Yeah, I think moving forward with mentorship, what was really, I haven't had a personal mentorship. I've always had access to a community or a generation who came before me, whether when I was 15, they were in their 20s, and now that I'm in my 20s, they're now in their 30s, and so on and so forth. But I've always had access to a generational community of musicians that I need to gain knowledge from and guidance. But in my second year of college, I was very fortunate to have Mark Fransman, who was my piano. I was a jazz piano major, and Mark really, our lessons and our conversations didn't end when my 45 to 50 minutes of a lesson was finished. We would go for coffee, and he'd invite me to his gigs, and we would session. And whenever I had a question, I could reach out to him, and he would prioritize that. And I really appreciated how Mark not only shared knowledge, theoretical knowledge, and practical knowledge, his practical knowledge with me, but also the personal and emotional and psychological side of an artist. I would really love to take that on and really nurture a younger artist, because there's a lot to this industry, more than just being able to play. It's also being an artist. You have to deal with parts of yourself, and sometimes it can get in the way of your creativity and your confidence or your development. And so moving forward with mentorship, I would love to keep that in mind and to really share that, as well as my theoretical knowledge. So I look forward to it.
That's great. I'm sure there's somebody listening who wants to be your mentee, so they need to see you. Well, I think, we've kind of come to the end of our program. I'm checking right now. I don't see any additional questions. I just want to thank the panelists for joining from all around the world, preparing for a show, getting ready to get on a plane, getting ready for the evening. So I just thank you, everyone, for being here, for joining with us, talking about jazz, International Jazz Day. And let's move forward and collaborate and mentor and just appreciate everything we have today from the jazz, people who originated jazz, and how it still continues. And it's an amazing art form that just will be here for generations to come. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys.
Peace, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.